Alright, so before we dive deeper into different specific topics and features of SASS, first of all I want to talk about what actually SASS itself is. So what is SASS? Abbreviation itself stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets. It's an extension to CSS, CSS Preprocessor, which makes code more powerful and flexible. So you can write CSS in much more easier way. SASS gives us ability to write CSS code like programming language because we are able to use variables, functions, conditional statements, and so on. If those things are not familiar for you, then do not worry about it because throughout the coming lectures you will be able to learn about them in details. Alright, let's talk a little about some features of SASS. As we already said, we are able to use variables, functions, conditional statements, but besides that, one of the most important things about SASS is that it gives us ability to split our styles in different files in more efficient and convenient way. So we can avoid to put all the styles in just one CSS file. And actually it's a very popular approach nowadays. Next thing that I want to talk about is how SASS works. Actually, browser itself cannot read and understand SASS code. We write SASS, but eventually we need to translate it into standard CSS code. This process is called transpiling. Sometimes you may hear compilation instead of transpilation. Actually, both of them are similar processes. Only difference is that in case of compilation, human readable code is translating into machine readable code. In case of transpilation, human readable code is translating into another human readable language. In this case, SASS into CSS. After transpilation, browser will be able to read standard CSS code and render it on the page. Alright, one more thing that I want to refer to is an extension of SASS file. You are able to use either SASS or SCSS, which stands for Sassy CSS. Both of them works fine, but there are some differences in syntax. In case of SASS, we need to protect some rules. We don't have any curly braces and semicolons, and therefore code is indentation sensitive. Besides that, there are other slight differences, but I'm not going to go deeper because throughout the course we're going to use SCSS as an extension, which is more popular approach, and it's much like standard CSS, where we can use curly braces, semicolons, and we don't have any strict rules about indentation and white spaces. For your information, SASS was designed in 2006 by Hampton Catlin, and then developed by Natalie Weizenbaum and Chris Epstein. So thanks to those guys, and now it's time to start writing some SASS code. For that, let's move on to the next video. Alright, so once we have installed SASS compiler, it's time to move on and start discussing one of the first topics, which is SASS variables. If you are not familiar with variables, then it's not really hard to understand how they work. In general, variable is like a container which stores some data values, and then those values can be used for multiple times. Variables exist in standard CSS as well, but for now they have partial support in modern web browsers, and also I think that using SASS variables is more convenient and flexible than using standard CSS variables. Alright, let's go ahead and start writing some code. First of all, I'm going to run SASS compiler. Let's open terminal. Then navigate to our working folder, write cd, desktop, and folder name SASS introduction. And then type npm run watch. Alright, so in the last video we have changed background color of body element, and actually I'm going to get rid of this style. So in order to demonstrate how SASS variables work, at first I'm going to create some HTML elements. I want to use emmet, so let's create nav element with class name nav, in which we will have UL element. It will be followed by li, and lastly I'm going to insert here link element. Let's press tab, and here we go. We have here our elements. Let's insert here as a content, let's say home. Actually, I'm going to duplicate li element for 3 times, and then I will change content. For second one, write about us, then services, and lastly write contact. Alright, next we will have section element with class name banner. It will include heading h1, which will have content, let's say page heading, and also as its sibling element create paragraph with some dummy text. Alright, so the last part of HTML document will be footer. So let's create footer element with class footer, and inside it I'm going to insert h3 heading element as a content write footer heading, and lastly create again paragraph with some dummy text. Alright, that's all about HTML document. Now we can write some SASS code. Suppose that this is our web page and we're going to use several colors, I mean primary, secondary, and tertiary, for multiple times and for different elements. So instead of writing them always manually, as it happens in case of standard CSS, we are able to store color values into variables and then just use those variables when we need. So let's see what I'm talking about. Let's open SASS file. I want to remind you that we don't have to do anything with CSS file. All the styles will be written in SCSS file, and then it will be compiled into CSS, which is linked to HTML document. Okay, so in order to create SASS variable, we need to use $, which should be followed by name, let's say color primary, and we need to assign to it some color value, let's say orange. I'm going to create 2 more color variables. Second one is going to be color secondary. Let's use here gray. And then create third variable, color tertiary, with value royal blue. Alright, so variables for colors are created, and besides that I want to create 3 more variables for font sizes. First one is going to be for large font, so let's call it font LG and assign to it value 40 pixels. Then create another variable for medium size, call it font MD with a value of 30 pixels. And lastly create third variable for small size, write font SM 20 pixels. Alright, so we have created a couple of variables and now it's time to use them. Let's change background color of nav element, select it using class name nav. Then as a background color, let's use color primary. So as you can see, background color of nav element is changed, and if we take a look at main.css file, we will find that there are not any variables. We just have pure CSS code, selected nav element and its style background color orange. So our SASS code is compiled into CSS fine. Alright, let's go back to SCSS file. I'm going to select first heading element, write banner h1, and I'm going to increase its font size. Let's use here font LG, and as a color I'm going to use color secondary, and also I will place it in the center. Let's use text align center. Alright, so as you can see, all the styles are applied, and we did that in more dynamic way using variables. Let's go ahead and give some styles to second heading, I mean footer. Let's select it, write footer h3. At first let's make its font size medium, write font size, and use variable called font MD. As a color, use again color secondary. Let's copy it from here, paste, and lastly place heading in the center using text align center. So as you can see, we used here same color twice, and I think it's a good moment to demonstrate how useful and dynamic SASS variables are. Let's say we want to change color for both headings. Then you don't have to do it for each element. You can just change value for variable. Let's use here, for example, green. So you see that color for both headings is changed. So that's the power of SASS variables. It makes code more dynamic. We can see it clearly on such little example, and you can imagine how useful it would be on much big projects. Alright, next thing that I want to talk about is scope of SASS variables. In general, we have global scope and local scope. In this case, those variables are created on global scope, but if you create variable inside curly braces, then it will have local scope. So I want to talk a little about relationship of those scopes. Let's create variable with name again, color secondary inside h1 and assign to it value red. So if we save, then color of first heading will be changed and will become red, but for second heading, which uses same variable, color won't be changed. As you see, it's still gray. It happens because we created new variable inside h1. It has local scope, and therefore it doesn't have any influence on variable which has same name and is created on global scope. If you want to use this variable on global scope as well, then you can add to it exclamation mark and the keyword global. So if we save, then color of footer heading will be changed as well. Alright, so I just wanted to show you how SASS variables scopes work. In general, I don't recommend to create local variables. Always try to declare variables on global scope. But anyway, if you come across somewhere such things, you won't be confused. Okay, before I finish this lecture, I want to show you one more thing. As you see, we have here dash signs in names of variables, and you're able to use dash and underscore interchangeably. I mean, if we declare variable with dash and then use it with underscore, then variable will work and will be still valid. It's kind of strange thing, but in SASS it works that way. Alright, that's all about SASS variables. I hope everything was clear, so see you in the next video. Alright, so in the last video we discussed what SASS variables are, how they work and how useful they can be. The next topic that I'm going to talk about is nesting. Actually, nesting is a really good and useful feature of SASS because it allows us to avoid writing many lines of CSS. Also, it is very easy to use this approach. We can define nesting as a shortcut of creating CSS rules. Alright, let's go to brackets and see in practice how we can use nesting. First of all, I'm going to delete this line because we don't need it anymore. So suppose that we want to give some styles to li and link elements. For that, as you already know, we can just simply select ul li. Let's get rid of those default bullets using list style none. So that's standard CSS approach. We selected child of nav element outside of it. In SASS, we can do it in more efficient way. Instead of writing this code outside of nav element, we can insert it inside curly braces. So let's grab this code and paste it here. As you see, we have the same result. Code is working. And if we go to main.css file, you will see that here we have standard CSS code. li is placed outside of nav element. Alright, we can go deeper. As you know, link element is placed inside li. So we can select it here inside curly braces of li element. Let's get rid of default styles using text decoration, none. So as you see, this code is working as well. We don't have here underlines anymore. Actually, I'm going to grab this code and place it outside of li element because we will go even more deeper. We will need to create another level inside link element, and so it wouldn't be quite a good practice. I don't recommend to create many levels of nesting because it will make your code more complicated, and I think it will be no longer flexible and efficient. So add some more styles to link element, increase font size, I'm going to use here font SM. Also change color. Let's use color secondary. Alright, actually I'm not going to waste time on styling because the main subject of this lecture is to explain how nesting actually works in SASS. Suppose that we want to create hover effect on a link element. So I want to show you how to deal with pseudo classes in case of nesting. You may think that we can just simply write here hover with some style, let's say color, with value color tertiary. Let's hover, and you see that nothing happens. Hover effect doesn't work, so something is wrong here. Let's go ahead and check compiled code and see how it looks like. So you see that we have here space. It's not syntactically correct, and that's why hover effect is not working. In order to fix that problem, we can use special character ampersand, which indicates parent element. In this case, link element. So if we hover again, then it will work, and also if we check CSS file, you will find that space is removed. Alright, that's the way how nesting works in SASS. Throughout the course we will frequently use it, especially in projects, so you will definitely get good practice in it. One more thing that I want to mention is that during lectures we sometimes check compiled code in main.css file, I mean when it's needed, but I recommend you to check it frequently, compare codes, because it will become more understandable and clear how SASS actually works. Alright, that's it. In this lecture we have learned about nesting in SASS. See you in the next one. Alright, once we are introduced to nesting in SASS, I'm going to move on and discuss another one of the great features of SASS, which is called mixin. Mixin is an awesome tool to protect one of the rules of developers, which is do not repeat yourself. So what is mixin? Mixin is a block of code that allows us to group CSS styles, which we may reuse for multiple times. It's like variables, but it's more powerful and dynamic because you can use a bunch of styles for different elements. Alright, let's open brackets and start creating mixins. As you see, we gave some styles to banner heading and also to footer heading. They have some similar styles, I mean color and text align, and actually that's the case where we can use mixin. In order to create it, we need to place @, which will be followed by keyword mixin. Also, we need to name it, let's say heading styles. And then we need to open curly braces, where we have to insert block of code. So as we said, both headings have same color and same text alignment, so we can grab those two styles and place them inside mixin. Then delete those styles for second heading. In order to apply them to both headings, we need to do the following. We have to use keyword include with @, which should be followed by name of mixin. So as you can see, color for both headings is changed back, and also they are placed in the center. Let's take a look at main.css file. So you can see that styles are assigned to both elements individually. Here we do not see principle, do not repeat yourself, because it's compiled code, and in this case what we care about is only SASS code, which for now looks much more flexible and efficient. So that's the basic use case of mixins. Besides that, we can use them like functions. I mean, we can pass some parameters and arguments. As you can see, both headings have different font sizes, but despite this we can define those different font sizes inside mixin. For that, after name of mixin we need to place parentheses, and inside them we have to insert parameter. For that we need again $, then name of parameter, in this case font size. So you can consider it as a variable as well. Alright, next we need to define font size, and we have to assign to it parameter, which we defined here. So inside mixin we created something like general draft for font size, and then we will define specific values for each heading element manually. First of all, let's delete those properties. Then we have to define arguments for mixin. For that, we need to open parentheses. For first heading, we need to use font LG. As for footer heading, insert font MD. So you can see that we have same result, but we achieved it in more efficient and dynamic way. In CSS file, again, we have all those styles assigned to headings individually, like it happens in standard CSS. Alright, I'm sure that step by step you're getting how powerful and flexible is SASS and its features. We can go even more further. You are able to define default parameters inside Mixin, and actually this feature makes SASS code like code of programming language, especially like JavaScript. Let's see what I'm talking about. If we assign to this parameter some value, let's say 50 pixels, then it will be applied to elements wherever you don't define arguments manually. So if I delete argument for footer heading, then its font size will be increased and became 50 pixels. As for banner heading, its font size won't be changed because we define argument for it manually. Alright, before we finish this lecture, I want to show you one more feature regarding mixins. If we are going to use property which may have more than one values separated by a comma, then parameter inside mixin should be followed by 3 dots. To demonstrate that use case of mixin, I'm going to write following. Suppose that we want to create hover effect on footer heading, and on hover we need to change color and background color. And also besides that we need to use transition. We can do it like this. Let's add hover to h3, use nesting, write ampersand, hover, then define color and assign to it color tertiary, and also write background color, and in this case use color primary. So if we hover, then styles will be applied, but as I said, I'm going to use transition. For that, let's create new mixin, call it transition. Of course, it's not mandatory to use this name, it's optional and you can use whatever you want. Next, we have to insert parameter followed by 3 dots, and then use transition property, and as a value assign to it parameter. So in order to apply transition to footer heading, we need to use this mixin using include, right? Include transition. And inside parentheses, we have to insert values of transition property. First one is color with duration, 0.5 seconds. And then background color with duration, let's say 1 second. Let's save, then hover, and you see styles are changing smoothly, so it means that transition is working. So remember that when you're going to use property which can take several values separated by a comma, then inside mixin, parameter should be followed by 3 dots. If we remove them and save, then in terminal we will get an error. So do not forget to use those 3 dots with parameter. By the way, if something doesn't work for you, then always check terminal, read text of error, and it may help. Alright, that's all about mixins in SASS. Again, it's really powerful and useful feature, and of course you will meet it throughout projects many times. Okay, let's move on to the next lecture. Alright, so in previous lecture we learned about mixins in SASS, which are really powerful features, and in this video we're going to talk about another really useful tool of SASS, which allows us to avoid writing many lines and reuse some code. So we will discuss what extend is, how it works, and how to use it. So as a definition, we can say that extend allows one selector to inherit styles of another selector. It avoids code bloat by grouping selectors which have the same styles. Like mixin, extend gives us ability to write cleaner and concise code. Alright, in order to understand better what extend can do, let's write some code. First of all, I'm going to delete some code from previous lectures because it's getting bigger and it might confuse you. Of course, you are able to get source files for each lecture in case if you want to recall something. Let's delete those mixins and also block of code for heading elements. Now I think it's much more cleaner and we can start writing some new examples. As it was in case of mixins, we can create separate block of code, which then can be used wherever we need it. For that, we can create new class. Let's call it heading. And then let's add to it some styles. Write color. Use here color primary. Then font size. And assign to it font LG. Next one is going to be background color with color secondary. And lastly, write text align center. So we created a couple of styles, and now in order to apply those styles to heading elements, in other words, to inherit those styles, we can use extend with @ sign. And then we need to indicate selector from where we want to inherit styles. In this case, heading. Let's copy this line and paste it for footer heading as well. So here you can see that styles are applied to both heading elements. Also, if we check CSS file, you will find that all three selectors share the same style and they are separated by a comma. So we used less code and managed styling elements in more concise and dynamic way. Like mixin, extend allows you to reuse some styles and gives us ability to protect the rule do not repeat yourself. Alright, suppose that we have hover effect on banner heading. Write &hover. Then insert here background color, green. And also assume that we want to extend this style to footer heading as well. You may think that we can do it in the following way. Instead of class heading, we can write here banner h1. But actually, this is not quite correct, because if we save, we will get an error in terminal. The reason is that combination of those selectors cannot be used with extend, so you can leave here either h1, but in this case you need to delete class banner from here as well, because selectors should be matched. Or you can just simply assign some class to h1 and use it in both cases. So for h3 heading element, all the styles are applied from heading, and also hover effect works fine. If we take a look at main.css file, you can see clearly what's happening here. Again, styles of heading are applied to h1 and h3 elements, and also hover works for those two elements. Alright, so that's all about extend. In practice, there might be some cases when you should prefer to use mixin or extend. It absolutely depends on situation. The fact is that both of them are really powerful and useful tools. Okay, that's it. See you in the next video. Alright, so in previous lectures we've been talking about variables, mixins and extend. They are somehow related to programming languages, and the next topic that I'm going to discuss is actually part of any programming language. So in this video you will learn about functions in SASS. If you're familiar with at least basics of any programming language, then you should know what functions are, but if not, that's no problem because it's not really hard to understand. In SASS you are able to create your custom functions, and also it provides some built-in functions. Before we write some code, let's talk a little about what function itself is. When you want to run some code over and over again, then each time you can execute or run function. So you create function once with some statement. For example, you can make some calculation or manipulate on colors, and then when you want to use it, you need to call this function. Alright, actually it would be better if we see all of those things in practice. Let's go to brackets. So in order to create function, you need to place @ sign with keyword function. Then it should be followed by name of function, let's say font size. Actually, name of function can be optional. You can call it whatever you want. Then after name, we need to open parentheses and then curly braces, in which we can create some statement. Before we write any statement, I'm going to insert parameter inside parentheses, let's say size. So using this function, we will double size of font. In order to do that, we need size multiplied by 2. But actually, this code is not quite enough. Function will not give us any value until we use keyword return, again with @sign. So in order to work this function, I mean to double font size, we need to call it, and whatever we insert as an argument, it will be multiplied by 2. So let's select paragraph of banner, write banner P, and assign to it font size. So here we need to call function. For that we need to write name of function font size with parentheses. Inside parentheses we have to insert an argument. You can write here some value like 10 pixels, 20 pixels and so on, but I'm going to use here variable font sm. As you know, it equals to 20 pixels, so font size of banner paragraph will become 40 pixels. Actually, you may think that there is no need to use function here. We can directly assign to it 40 pixels, and actually that's absolutely right. But as I said for several times, when you work on big projects, then function could be very useful. Now I just showed you how to create them and how to use for just demonstration purposes. Okay, like it was in case of Mixins, we can define default values for parameters. For example, if we assign to size some value, let's say 25 pixels, and then we select footer paragraph, define font size, in which we just call our function, then font size of footer paragraph will become 50 pixels. Because by default size equals to 25 pixels, and then it's multiplied by 2. So it will happen until we define argument for function manually. If we insert here, let's say 30 pixels, then font size will be increased and become 60 pixels, and default value will be no longer applied. Alright, that's all about custom functions. As we said at the beginning of this lecture, SASS also provides several built-in functions. I'm not going to go through all of them. I will show you just a couple of commonly used built-in functions. Let's use the first one, which is called lighten. I'm going to work on navigation, which has background color orange. So function called lighten allows us to make color lighter by some specific percentage. So we can write lighten, then wrap color by parentheses. So color is going to be first argument. As for second one, we can indicate here specific percentage value. Let's say 20%. So as you can see, background color of nav became slightly lighter. And if we check CSS file, then nav element will have proper color. In the same way, we can use function called darken, which actually does the opposite. It makes color darker with specific percentage. So you see that in this case, background color became darker by 20%. Alright, so those functions, I mean lighten and darken, are frequently used with hover effects. But besides that, we have some other functions which we use with colors. Next one is transparentize. It allows us to make color transparent by some specific value. As a second argument, we can indicate here value from 0 to 1. Let's say 0.6. So as you can see, color became a little bit transparent. Let's check compiled code and see what we have here. So as you see, color is converted into RGBA value, which has opacity 0.4. If we change value and make it 1, then background of nav will be 100% transparent, and also if we check CSS file, opacity will become 0. Alright, that's the way how transparentize function works. We have another function called mix. It allows us to mix two different colors. For example, let's insert here blue and green. If we save, then we will get mixed color. Besides that, we can insert here third argument, percentage value, which will belong to first color. So if we insert here, let's say 10%, then in mixed color, 10% will be blue, and the rest of 90% will be green. So using third argument, you can define a ratio of colors in mixed color. Alright, so I have showed you some of the commonly used functions, but besides them, there are lots of built-in functions in SASS. As a reference, I'm going to leave this URL, which you can find in source files. You can visit it and go through some of those functions. Alright, that's all about functions in SASS. See you in the next video. Alright, so in one of the previous lectures we talked about extend, which allows us to reuse a bunch of styles for different elements for multiple times. But as you remember, in case of extend, we created new class, assigned to it some styles, and then extended them to different elements. So in that case, we created class. But what could we do if we didn't need to create new class? One of the solutions is to use placeholder selectors. They were created to solve this exact problem. Okay, let's open brackets. Before we use placeholder selectors, I'm going to clean up a little bit our code. Let's delete those paragraphs and also remove function. So here we have class heading, which then is extended for h1, and h1 itself is extended to footer heading. If we check main.css file in compiled code, we will find that here exists class heading. Even if we don't extend it to any element, then class heading will still exist in compiled code, but in case of placeholder selectors, we have different situation. In order to create placeholder selector, here instead of dot, we just need to place %sign. So if we save and check main.css file, you will find that placeholder selector with its styles doesn't exist here. But if we get back extend, let's change dot into %, then those styles will be applied to h1 and to h3 as well. And if we go again to CSS file, then you will see that h1 and h3 share the same styles, and we don't have here class or any other thing anymore. So placeholder selector allows us to create cleaner and concise code. In case of creating class, if you need it just to extend some styles to other elements, and class itself is not used anywhere else, then it's much better to use placeholder selectors. It creates more readable code because when you see it, you get that it's created specifically to extend some styles to element or elements. So that's the little advantage of using them. Alright, actually that's it about placeholder selectors. There might be some situations where you could use them in an efficient way, so you need to know how to work with placeholder selectors. Alright, so at the beginning of this section we talked about some of the features of SASS, and one of the most important and useful feature which SASS provides is that we're able to split our entire SASS code into different files and make project much more well structured. It's really a big advantage of this technology. It's important especially when you work with big projects. Instead of having just one file in which you put tons of lines of code, you can split it in different files. It will cause less confusing and complication and will make your file structure more convenient. So in this video we're going to talk about imports and partials in SASS. Alright, let's go to brackets. As you know, we have here just one SCSS file, I mean main.scss, in which we put all the code. Suppose that we want to create new SCSS file just for testing. Let's call it test. test.scss. Then inside that file, select one of our elements, let's say footer heading, write footer h3, and change its font style, make it italic. So if we save, then nothing will be changed on the page, and even if we restart terminal using Ctrl C, then Y, and run command npm run watch, still we will have same result. The reason is that compiler watches only main.scss file. If we open package.json file, you can see that we indicated here only main.scss file. In this case, we need compiler to watch entire SCSS folder. In order to achieve that, we need to get rid of main.scss file and this slash as well. Then restart terminal again. So in order to compile code, we need to make some change. Let's add here border 3 pixels, solid and red. Let's save, and you see that in CSS folder we got new file called test.css, in which we have compiled code from test.scss file. But despite this, still we have same result on the page. Of course it happens because that new CSS file is not linked to HTML file. And actually we don't need to do it, we will fix that problem exactly using import. So we don't need those new CSS files when we create new SCSS files. We want to compile all the code, I mean code from different SCSS files inside main.css. Alright, first of all let's delete test.css file. Then in order to avoid creating new CSS files each time, we just need to rename test.scss file and place here underscore at the beginning. Now, if we check terminal, we will get an error. Actually, it happens because we just changed name of file. So let's run this command again. Then make some change in here. Change color. Let's make it blue. So if we save, then we will no longer get new file in CSS folder. And also if we check terminal, we will find that even compiling didn't happen. The reason is that underscore, which we added here to test SCSS file. Alright, the only thing that we need to do is to connect this code to main.scss file. For that we have to use import. So let's go to main.scss file and at the beginning write @, then import. And inside quotes we have to indicate path of file. Actually, we don't need to indicate folder name because both files are placed in same directory. We just need to write name of file without underscore and also without its extension. In general, you're able to use them, but it's not mandatory. Compiler can look for files without underscore and without file extension. So if we save, then everything will work perfectly. As you see, footer heading got new styles. And also if we check main.css file, you will find compiled code from test.scss file. Alright, so this is a little example how import works in SASS. Files like test.scss and also other files which might be created except main.scss file are called partials. Actually, throughout the projects, we will create much bigger file structures where you will learn about how to separate files. You will see modern practices and solutions. Okay, that's all about imports and partials in SASS. See you in the next video.